Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. My name is Nur Shamsina, and today my group is going to present our group project for chemical safety. Our group consists of Ryan Geeks, Dayang Nur Izni, Fatimah, and myself.
Alright, let's begin with the introduction of the chosen workplace. We chose Coin Feed Mills near Berhad. It is a feed mill manufacturing company based in Muara, Brunei, which has been operational since 2018. It produces a wide range of animal feeds vital to supporting the livestock and poultry sectors in Brunei and surrounding regions. The company's operations play a critical role in ensuring the production of high quality feed that meets the specific nutritional needs of various animal species, contributing to their growth, health, and productivity. The feed manufacturing process involves the careful selection and processing of raw material to create nutrient-rich feed formulation. The key ingredient like grain, oilseed, protein sources, vitamins, and minerals are blended to form a balanced diet for animal. These formulations are tailored to meet the diverse dietary requirements of animal at different growth stages, whether for poultry, livestock, or aquaculture. At GCFB, the production department is divided into several sections, each with distinct function. The warehouse section is for storage of materials, intake dumping section is for initial material handling, premix section is for blending of ingredients, control room section is to monitor and control the processes, stacking off section is for the final packaging and distribution. These departments work together to ensure the smooth flow of materials, precise formulation, efficient processing, and final packaging of the animal feed. There are a few key stages in animal feed manufacture at GCFB. The first one is raw material procurement and storage, cleaning and pre-processing, feed formulation, mixing and batching, petalizing or milling, cooling and drying, coating and additives, quality control and testing, and lastly is the packaging and distribution. The role of chemicals in QAQC at Coin Feed Mills. In the quality assurance and quality control, chemicals play a vital role in ensuring the safety, quality, and nutritional integrity of the animal feed produced. One of the key areas where chemicals are used is in microbial testing, and some of the chemical used are disinfectants, antimicrobial agents for the purpose of detection and control microbial contamination in feed. This ensures that the final product is free from any harmful pathogens such as bacteria and fungi, which could potentially harm the animal consuming the feed. Another use of chemical are in analytical chemical for lab testing to check for the moisture content. Some of the chemical use are disinfectant and specific reagents. And for contamination detection, chemical use are reagents and analysis kit. This is for the purpose of checking for harmful substances such as heavy metals and mycotoxins. For coating and additives, chemical use are vitamins, mineral, and probiotic. This is to enhance the nutritional value and health benefits of the feed. Let's start with the introduction to nitric acid. The molecular structure of nitric acid is defined by its composition of hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen atoms, creating a distinct arrangement that analyzes its potent chemical properties. At the core of the molecule is a nitrogen atom which forms single bond with 3 oxygen atoms. One of these oxygen atoms is also bonded to a hydrogen atom, creating a characteristic nitrate group. This arrangement impacts unique characteristic to nitric acid. Nitric acid represented by the chemical formula of HNO3, and it stands as a formidable and highly corrosive mineral acid of significant importance in diverse industrial application. Its reputation is largely attributed to its remarkable ability to dissolve metal and form nitrates. Some of the properties of nitric acid are highly corrosive, colorless liquid, pungent odor, potent oxidizing properties. The main production method for nitric acid is Oswald process. The Oswald process serves as the main method for producing nitric acid. This process involves oxidizing ammonia to form nitric oxide, which is then further oxidized to nitrogen dioxide before being absorbed in water to yield nitric acid. Some of the industrial uses of nitric acid are in fertilizing manufacturing, explosive production, and other chemical manufacturing, and it is also widely used in laboratory, whereby it is used for analytical purposes, chemical synthesis, and cleaning and etching. It is a very versatile chemical. It contributes to scientific research and technological advancement, and it is essential in the synthesis of various compounds and materials. Toxicology overview of nitric acid. Nitric acid are highly reactive, have corrosive nature and toxicity. Nitric acid is a powerful oxidizing agent, meaning it can react violently with many substances, especially flammable materials and metal. This reactivity increases the risk of dangerous chemical reaction when handled improperly. As for the corrosive nature, nitric acid is extremely corrosive and can cause severe damage to tissues upon contact, including skin burns, eye damage, and respiratory issues. It can also dissolve metal and other material, contributing to its high hazard profile. And as a highly acidic substance, nitric acid can be toxic to human. Inhalation of its fume can lead to severe respiratory irritation, while ingestion can cause extensive internal damage. Chronic exposure can also lead to long-term health effects such as lung diseases or skin sensitivities. Some of the exposure route is through dermal and eye contact, in an inhalation exposure and ingestion exposure. Through skin contact, it can cause irritation and chemical burns. The severity depends on the concentration of the nitric acid and the duration of the exposure. If it is through eye contact, it can cause severe damage, requiring immediate irrigation and prevent permanent harm. For inhalation exposure, the effects are respiratory irritation, whereby it can cause coughing and shortness of breath. For high concentration, it can lead to life-threatening pulmonary edema. It's a disease, and if it does, and for injection exposure, the effects are corrosive damage to the gastrointestinal tract, and some of the symptoms are abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Some of the action needed is to immediately take medical attention. Long-term health and effects and systemic toxicity. For long-term exposure risk, prolonged exposure to nitric acid doesn't just cause immediate damage, it can lead to serious long-term health complications. For workers exposed over time, this could result in respiratory issue, whereby chronic exposure can cause severe lung damage, including conditions like lung fibrosis, which impairs breathing and lung function. The second one would be skin sensitivation, whereby continuous contact with nitric acid may lead to allergic reaction or skin sensitivity. making future exposure even more dangerous. For the systemic toxicity, nitric acid doesn't just stay where it touches, it rapidly absorbs into the bloodstream, spreading throughout the body and affecting vital organs like the lungs and gastrointestinal system. This means it has a toxic effects. Once it in the bloodstream, nitric acid can cause systemic toxicity, leading to broader health issues. The effects are not localized, whereby they can impact your entire body and cause long-term organ damage. Employers are responsible for ensuring the employees' exposure to hazardous chemical remain within the permissible exposure limit set to safeguard their health and safety. So according to the Occupational Safety and Health Regulation 2000, it is the employer's responsibility to ensure that no employees exposure surpasses the ceiling limit specified in the schedule of permissible exposure limit. The exposure limit serves as a critical safety guideline for workplace. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration has set the exposure limit of nitric acid at 2 parts per million over 8 hours time weighted average workday. This limit ensures that workers are not exposed to more than 2 parts of nitric acid per million parts of air on average during their workday. So these regulations are designed to prevent potential health risks associated with prolonged exposure to nitric acid and to safeguarding workers from respiratory and other systemic health issues. Chemical hazard and risk assessment. Nitric acid falls under few regulations, underscoring the need for thorough risk assessment and effective hazard communication to ensure a safe working environment. Some of the regulatory framework are Occupational Safety and Health Use and Standard of Exposure of Chemical Hazards to Health, Industry Code of Practice of Chemical Classification and Hazard Communication. These classification requirements are specific labeling and hazard classification. It is a supplier responsibilities to ensure clear and consistent hazard communication. Some of the label components are pictogram, signal words, hazard statements, precautionary statements, and for figure it has hazard labeling for nitric acid. The assessment steps can be followed are hazard classification, acute toxicity, and health effect evaluation, exposure level determination, and route of exposure. For inhalation exposure, some of this approach can be used to do risk assessment, whereby we can take quantitative approach, for example air sampling data. Qualitative approach is done through proximity to source and exposure duration. For thermal exposure, observation of contact extent and duration, then the identification of work processes that increase the exposure risk. The importance of chemical risk assessment is for thorough chemical risk assessment. So adherence to regulation and guidelines to ensure workplace safety. So there's the need of continuous monitoring and updating of safety measure is very, very crucial. Hazard control for nitric acid. There are a few control measures that can be used. It is through the hierarchy of hazard control. First will be elimination, whereby we remove nitric acid from industrial processes so that we can find safer alternatives. And substitution, replace with less hazardous chemical where possible. For engineering control, the use of exhaust ventilation (LEV) and chemical fume hoods to capture and remove vapors. For administrative control, it is through a clear guideline training, science and label, health monitoring, records keeping and safety checks. And as for PPE, the use of gloves, goggles, face shield, protective clothing, respiratory protection, and boots and helmets.
Phenyl red, or also known as phenolsulfonylene, is an organic compound that functions as a pH indicator. Phenyl red is typically available in a powdered form and is soluble in water and ethanol. It has a molecular weight of 354.38 gram per molecule and a pKa of approximately 7.4, which means it is highly effective for pH measurement in environment close to physiological pH around 7.4. In biological research, phenol red is commonly added to culture media to help researchers observe any shift in the acidity or alkalinity, which may indicate changes in cellular metabolism or contamination. Phenol red plays an important role in the quality control process within the feed manufacturing industry, particularly in monitoring the pH level of water and liquid ingredients. As a pH indicator, phenol red changes color depending on the acidity and alkalinity of a solution, which is essential for maintaining optimal condition during feed production. For instance, when the pH is neutral around 6.8 to 8.2, phenol red appears red to orange, signaling ideal condition. If the pH becomes too acidic, less than 6.8, the indicator turns yellow, suggesting that adjustments are needed, while a basic pH above 8.2 turns the indicator to purple, signaling the need for correction. This quick feedback allows manufacturers to adjust pH level in real time to ensure the stability and nutritional quality of the feed. In addition to monitoring water and liquid ingredients, phenol red is also useful in processes like fermentation, which is commonly used in the feed production to improve nutrient digestibility or introduce prebiotic. During fermentation, phenol red can track pH changes, ensuring the process occurs under optimal condition for microbial activity. The indicator is also crucial in the production of aquafeed, where maintaining proper water quality is essential for aquatic organisms. By continuously monitoring pH, phenol red ensures that the water used in aquafeed production remains suitable for the organism consuming the feed. Moreover, in the feed additive or supplement containing pH-sensitive components such as vitamin, enzymes, or prebiotic, phenol red helps manufacturers maintain the correct pH to preserve their effectiveness and stability. Overall, phenol red is a quick, cost-effective, and reliable tool that enhances the feed manufacturing process by ensuring the pH level remains within the desired range. This not only supports the safety and stability of the feed, but also contribute to improvement feed quality and nutrient retention. Toxicology studies how chemicals affect living organisms and their potential to cause harm. While phenol red is generally not considered highly toxic, it is important to understand some key principles to ensure safe use. Dose-response relationship. This principle means the effect of chemical depends on the amount of duration of exposure. For phenol red, low concentration, like those used in labs, pose minimal risk, but higher concentration or long exposure could increase the chances of irritation or allergic reaction. Routes of exposure. Phenol red can enter the body through inhalation, ingestion, and skin contact. Inhalation rarely causes mild respiratory irritation, while ingestion, large amount could lead to stomach discomfort, though unlikely in controlled environment. Skin contact may cause irritation in some people. Acute exposure, which means short-term contact, usually don't cause severe harm. Chronic exposure, repeated and long-term contact may increase the risk of irritation or sensitization, especially for people who handle phenol red regularly. Individual susceptibility. Some individuals may be more sensitive, reacting to low exposure level with skin or respiratory discomfort. Factors like age, health status, and allergies can influence a person's reaction to the chemical. So even though phenol red is not highly toxic, it is still important to set and follow exposure limit to protect workers. Exposure limits are guidelines that set the maximum amount of a chemical worker can be exposed to in the air over a specific time. This limit help to ensure people don't experience harmful effect of the chemical exposure. Two main type of exposure limits are permissible exposure limit (PELs), which is legal limit set by agencies like OSHA. No PEL exists for phenol red because of its low toxicity, but cautions is still important, especially in environments where it is used frequently. Another exposure limit is threshold limit values (TLVS), recommended guidelines from organizations like ACGIH. No TLV is set for phenol red, but it's good practice to minimize exposure. Another one is time weight average (TWA), represent the average exposure to a chemical over an 8 hour a day. While phenol red doesn't have a specific TWA, using similar guideline for low toxicity chemical can help avoid overexposure when it's used often. Phenol red's low toxicity means specific exposure limit aren't set, but it is still important to use standard safety precautions. Although phenol red is generally considered a low hazard chemical, it is still important to assess potential risks, particularly when handling or accidental exposure occur. The risks are mostly related to its powdered form, including eye irritation. When dust comes into contact with the eye, it can cause discomfort and redness. Skin irritation, where prolonged contact may irritate sensitive skin, so gloves are recommended. Inhalation, where inhaling phenol red dust can lead to mild respiratory irritation, though it is very rare. Accidental ingestion is unlikely to cause serious harm, but large quantities may result in mild gastrointestinal discomfort. Most of these risks are low in both likelihood and severity, but following control measures can minimize them and ensure safe handling. So, wear a protective eyewear to prevent dust from irritating your eyes. Use gloves to protect skin, especially if you have allergies or sensitive skin. Ensure proper ventilation when handling phenol red powder to avoid inhaling dust. And lastly, avoid eating or drinking in the work area where phenol red is handled to prevent accidental ingestion. Controlling hazard associated with phenol red requires following the hierarchy of controls, a framework that prioritize methods to either eliminate hazard or minimize potential harm. This approach includes 5 main strategies: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. The most effective control is eliminating the hazard entirely. In cases where phenol red isn't essential, removing it from the process prevents exposure altogether. However, because phenol red is a necessary reagent in many laboratory and industrial processes, elimination is often not feasible. When elimination is not an option, substituting phenol red with less hazardous chemical can be effective. For example, if a less irritating pH indicator could serve the same purpose, switching to that alternative would reduce the risk of exposure. While this isn't always possible, it is important consideration in the control process. Engineering control focuses on designing physical systems that reduce exposure. For phenol red, particularly in its powdered form, using fume hoods or localized ventilation system can prevent dust from dispersing into the air, reducing the risk of inhalation. This is a proactive method that minimizes the hazard before it reaches to the worker. Number 4 is administrative controls, which involve proper training and procedure. Employees handling phenol red must be trained to follow standard operating procedures (SOPs) that minimize unnecessary exposure, such as proper storage, handling, and cleanup practices. Ensuring clear protocols are in place reduce the chances of accidental exposure. Last but not least is PPE. While the PPE is the least effective in the hierarchy of controls, it is still a critical layer of protection, especially when used alongside other methods. While working with phenol red, gloves should be worn to prevent skin contact, and protective eyewear should be used to avoid eye irritation. If handling phenol red in powdered form, a dust mask or respirator may be needed to protect against inhalation risk. Beyond these controls, safe storage practices are essential for preventing accidental spill or exposure. Phenol red should be stored in a dry, well-ventilated area away from incompatible substances. Ensuring containers are tightly sealed will help prevent the release of dust into the surrounding environment, further reducing exposure risk. In conclusion, controlling hazard associated with phenol red requires a multi-layered approach following the hierarchy of controls. By focusing on elimination where possible, substitution, engineering controls, administrative measures, and PPE, we can effectively minimize the risks associated with handling phenol red and ensure a safer working environment.
Hi, my name is Tayang Nurisni. So today I'm going to present about potassium hydroxide. Okay, so today we are delving into the fascinating world of potassium hydroxide, commonly referred to as caustic potash. Okay, with the chemical formula KOH, this potent alkaline compound is a cornerstone in various industries due to its highly reactive nature. Okay, firstly, let us discuss its structure. The potassium hydroxide consists of potassium ion K plus and a hydroxide ion OH negative. This configuration allows for a complete dissociation in water, resulting in a significant increase in pH level. So the chemical behavior of KOH is notably dynamic. It reacts exothermically with water, generating substantial heat. So this property is highly valued in both industrial and laboratory setting due to its ability to dissolve many substances and form highly alkaline solution. Okay, now let's visualize this through some molecular diagram on screen showing 2D and 3D structure of KOH. So this representation helps us understand its interaction with acids, organic compound, and metals. Okay, in the realm of feed manufacturing, KOH is indispensable. It plays pivotal role in protein analysis using the Checadle method, helping in the digestion of feed sample to accurately measure nitrogen content. It is also aids in analysis of fiber and lipid, which are crucial for determining nutritional value and energy density of feed products. So all these factors underscore the critical role of KOH in maintaining high quality and safety standard in livestock feed. Now let us on to the next slide. Okay, the second slide, principles of toxicology of potassium hydroxide. So moving on to the toxicological aspect of potassium hydroxide, it is important to understand that both its toxicokinetics and toxicodynamics. Okay, upon exposure, KOH dissociates into potassium and hydroxide ions, which are rapidly absorbed through mucosal tissue or damaged skin, potentially leading to metabolic alkalosis, a condition where the body pH becomes excessively alkaline. And then this strong alkalinity of KOH can denature protein and saponification of lipid, causing severe tissue damage and cell death. This manifests as burn on contact skin, eyes, muscular surface. Okay, it's imperative to address such exposure with immediate medical interventions. Okay, we also need to consider the routes of exposure: dermal contact, inhalation, and ingestion. So each present a significant risk from localized burn and systemic pH imbalance to respiratory irritation and gastrointestinal damage. Okay, understanding the dose response relation is crucial. The dose makes the poison, as they say. Okay, lower concentration might cause irritation, while higher concentration can cause and lead to severe damage and even death. Next, in this slide 3, I'm going to tell you about the importance of exposure limit for potassium hydroxide. Okay, so next let us talk about exposure limit. So the permissible exposure limit, or PEL, is a regulatory requirement and that stipulates the maximum amount of KOH that worker can be exposed to over their 8-long-hour shift. Okay, adherence to this limit is crucial for workplace safety. So we also have the threshold limit, or TLV as it mostly known, which include different standards like time-weighted average and short-term exposure limit. So each designed to safeguard against acute and chronic health effect. Moreover, the recommended exposure limit, or REL, from NIOSH provide additional guidelines. By following this, setting stricter limits to protect sensitive population and manage high-risk scenarios. So these standards highlight the importance of maintaining air quality within safe level through engineering control like ventilation and using appropriate personal protective equipment. So on to slide 4 is where we're going to discuss on chemical hazard and risk assessment for this potassium hydroxide. So when assessing the risk associated with KOH, it's essential to evaluate both the chemical hazard and the potential of exposure. Okay, so KOH possesses significant risks including skin, eye, muscular damage, mucosal damage, and the potential of generation of harmful aerosol. So this call for a detailed risk assessment to identify and mitigate this hazard through appropriate control measure. The risk rating formula, which multiplies hazard rating by exposure rating, helps prioritize safety intervention, such as it improve ventilation, protective clothing, comprehensive training for worker. So in conclusion, while potassium hydroxide is invaluable to industry or laboratory chemical, managing its risk through strict simplified safety control is about hazard control to protect health and potassium hydroxide. Finally, let's discuss this contribution after we discuss about everything at first. In conclusion, while potassium hydroxide on the hierarchy of control ranges from elimination laboratory control, where feasible, its risk to engineering control line, safe local exhaust ventilation, and is imperative to protect health and ensure safe handling. Okay, so for administrative control such as training, exposure monitoring, and work scheduling plays a critical role also in minimizing exposure. So personal protective equipment is also essential for providing a last line of defense against exposure. Is imperative. Next point, proper storage and labeling are equally important to prevent accidental exposure and ensure that all handling in conclusion, while potassium hydroxide is invaluable safety standards
Assalamualaikum, my name is Fatima. I'm going to present about acetone. Acetone is an organic compound also known as dimethylketone, 2-propanone, and beta-ketopropane. It's a widely used chemical with both industrial and natural origins. It is a highly versatile organic compound serving as a solvent for dissolving various substances and are used in the production of plastic fibers, drugs, and other chemicals. Its natural presence is observed in plant, trees, organic gases, and forest fire, as well as in the metabolism of fats in animals. Acetone is also detected in vehicle exhaust, tobacco smoke, and landfill emission with industrial processes, contributing significantly more acetone to the environment than natural sources. In the human body, acetone is a ketone body produced during metabolic states like ketoacidosis, often associated with diabetes or prolonged fasting. It provides energy for vital organs such as the brain and heart while helping to regulate blood pH. Despite being considered non-toxic in small amounts, excessive exposure to acetone, whether through inhalation or ingestion, can cause irritation, dizziness, and hepatotoxic effects such as liver damage. It is commonly detected in urine and blood with higher concentration, linked to certain medical conditions. Chemically, acetone is the simplest ketone, a colorless liquid and that evaporates quickly, dissolves in water, and has a sweetish odor. Its vapors are heavier than air and can pose a fire hazard given its low flash points of 0 degree Fahrenheit. Besides its industrial and physiological significance, acetone also occurs naturally in some organisms, including Humulus lupulus and Angelica dahurica. The study of acetone metabolism continues to provide insight into its potential physiological roles, such as its ability to act as a nutrient source and buffer for metabolic process during ketosis. Acetone is used for maintaining the integrity of quality analysis within the feed manufacturing quality control process. It is commonly used to extract fats and oils from the feed samples for chemical analysis, ensuring that the feed complies with nutritional and regulatory standards. Furthermore, acetone aids in identifying harmful contaminants and residue in both raw materials and finished products. Its high volatility and purity make it an excellent choice for quick and efficient sample preparation in laboratory testing. These are some of the names of the acetone. Alternative names, as you can see, 2-propanone, methylketone, acetone, dimethylketone, beta-ketopropanone, pyroacetic ether, propanone, dimethylformaldehyde, NSC135802. The molecular formula for acetone is C3H6O. Molar mass is 58.08 gram per mole. Charge number 67641. Charge name acetone. Boiling point 56 degrees Celsius. Press 760 torr. Melting point negative 94.8 degrees Celsius. Density 0.7899 gram centimeter cube at temperature 20 degrees Celsius. Now let me explain about the principle of toxicology of acetone. Acetone is volatile organic solvent which is widely used in industrial and laboratory settings. Its toxicological properties can be critically analyzed under two key areas: toxikinetics and toxicodynamics, with specific consideration of the principle of toxic syndrome recognition, the route of exposure, and dose-response relationship. Toxikinetics describe how acetone is absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted in the body. Acetone is readily absorbed through inhalation and dermal contact, with inhalation being the primary route of exposure in occupational setting. Once absorbed, acetone is distributed throughout the body, including the brain and other lipid-rich tissue, to its lipophilicity. It is metabolized primarily in the liver, where it is converted into acetate and then enters the tricarboxylic acid cycle or is excreted unchanged through urine and exhaled air. The route of exposure significantly influences acetone toxicity. Inhalation exposure at high concentration can cause dizziness, headache, and central nervous system depression, while dermal exposure is typically less severe unless prolonged or under compromised skin condition. This distinction underlines the importance of understanding exposure pathway and assessing occupational risk. Toxicodynamics examine how acetone interacts with biological system to produce effects. Acetone acts as a central nervous system depressant with its primary mechanism involving disruption of membrane potential and synaptic neurotransmission. At low exposures, acetone effects are mild and reversible, but higher doses may lead to narcosis or other systemic effects. This aligns with the toxicological principle of the dose makes the poison, which underscores that toxicity is dose-dependent. For example, workplace exposure below permissible exposure limit generally poses minimal risk, but exposure exceeding this threshold can result in acute and chronic health effects. Toxic syndrome recognition. Early recognition of acetone toxicity is critical for timely intervention. Toxic syndrome recognition, particularly for central nervous system effects like dizziness or confusion, enables rapid diagnosis and empirical therapy. Workers presenting with signs of acetone overexposure, such as mucosal irritation or neurological symptoms, should undergo immediate evaluation to prevent complications like metabolic acidosis. Implementing medical surveillance programs helps in identifying subclinical effects and mitigating risk. Dose response and the importance of exposure control. The dose makes the poison. Aptly applies to acetone. It affects range from mild irritation at low doses to severe systemic effects at high concentration. In Malaysia, regulatory exposure. Importance of exposure limits for acetone. The establishment of exposure limits for acetone is to ensure the health and safety of workers who encounter this in the feed manufacturing quality process control process. In Malaysia, these limits are governed by the Occupational Safety and Health Use and Standards of Exposure of Chemicals Hazardous to Health Regulation 2000, Use Regulation under the Occupational Safety and Health Act 1994 and Amendment 2022. This discussion elaborates on the key exposure limits, permissible exposure limit, threshold limit value, and recommended exposure limit, and their importance in mitigating health risks associated with acetone exposure. Permissible exposure limit. The PEL is the regulatory limit that prescribes the maximum concentration of a hazardous chemical such as acetone that workers can be exposed to during an 8-hour workday. It ensures compliance with workplace safety standards and protects workers from the acute and chronic health effects. Under the use regulation, acetone exposure must not exceed the 8-hour time-weighted average specified in Schedule 1. Its limit helps prevent acute symptoms like dizziness, respiratory irritation, and central nervous system depression, which are common with high acetone exposure level. Additionally, the regulation specifies a ceiling limit, which prohibits instantaneous exposure level beyond the set limit to avoid acute toxic effect. Employer must monitor exposure level through air sampling and enforce engineering control or personal protective equipment to ensure compliance. Threshold limit value. The TLV provides a guideline for safe exposure level to chemicals. For acetone, the TLV is based on the time-weighted average for an 8-hour shift and incorporates a short-term exposure limit STEL for 15 minutes period. While TLVs are not legally enforceable, they serve as a benchmark for industrial hygiene practices and are often incorporated into workplace standards. The TLV STEL for acetone is critical in addressing tasks or processes that result in short bursts of high exposure, such as cleaning or degreasing operation. These limits minimize the risk of acute effects like eye and respiratory irritation while addressing cumulative exposure concerns. Recommended exposure limit (REL). The REL serves as a non-regulatory guideline to provide additional protection beyond mandatory limits like PEL. REL considers sensitive population and focus on preventing long-term health effects such as liver or kidney damage from chronic exposure to acetone. They are particularly important in Malaysia when manufacturing industry heavily rely on acetone as a solvent. REL advocate a more preventive approach by suggesting stricter exposure limit and promoting advanced engineering control and medical surveillance program. These recommendations align with the principle of the Chemical Health Risk Assessment Framework implemented under the USH 2000 regulations. Type of exposure. The risks associated with acetone depend on the type of route of exposure. First, inhalation. Acetone volatility makes inhalation the primary exposure route, leading to respiratory tract irritation and systemic. Assessment of chemical hazards and risks for acetone. Assessing chemical hazard and risk in the workplace involves the identification of hazardous chemical, evaluation of exposure levels, and implementation of control measures to mitigate risks as mandated under the Occupational Safety and Health USH 2000 regulation. Chemical hazards are categorized into physical, health, and environmental hazards. For example, acetone, a commonly used solvent, poses flammability risk, high volatility leading to inhalation hazards, and potential for skin irritation. The risks associated with chemical are used to assess by evaluating exposure through various routes such as inhalation, dermal contact, and ingestion. Inhalation is often the primary concern, especially for volatile organic compounds like acetone, which can cause respiratory irritation and central nervous system depression if exposure exceeds permissible exposure limit. The assessment process begins with the gathering of critical information including chemical safety data sheets, exposure levels, work unit categorization, and past incidents. The USH 2000 regulation requires employees to maintain a register of all chemicals hazardous to health along with their average usage, processes involved, and safety measures in place. This information supports the identification of hazards and the determination of exposure level. Once hazard and exposure levels are determined, the degree of risk is assessed by considering both the severity of the hazard and the likelihood of worker exposure. For example, acetone exposure during tasks such as cleaning or manufacturing is evaluated based on the time-weighted average and short-term exposure limit (STEL). The risk equation, risk equals to hazard times exposure, helps prioritize the implementation of control measures. Hazard rating is used to indicate the degree of hazard. In table, hazard rating for acetone, inhalation exposure, moderate risk classified as HR3 due to respiratory irritation and systemic toxicity. Significant risk arises with prolonged or high exposure. For dermal exposure, low to moderate risk classified as HR2 due to reversible irritation from contact with skin but limited systemic toxicity. The purpose of assessing exposure is to evaluate the potential of chemical hazards to health entering the body through various routes of exposure and the degree of exposure causing adverse health effect to workers in each work unit identified. In the table, exposure rating for acetone, inhalation exposure ER equals to 3. Workers frequently inhale acetone vapors during tasks like cleaning and degreasing in moderately controlled environments, example ventilation present but not highly efficient. Exposure duration is typically several hours during a shift. For dermal exposure, ER equals to 2, direct skin contact is less frequent, occurring mainly during accidental spills or splashes. Proper PPE, for example gloves, often reduce the severity of dermal exposure. The level of risk is determined based on the risk rating formula. Risk rating equals to hazard rating times exposure rating. From the table, risk rating for acetone, inhalation RR equals to 9. Moderate risk due to frequent and prolonged exposure to acetone vapors in enclosed area, ventilation improvement, and exposure monitoring are essential. For dermal, RR equals to 4. Low risk as exposure occurs infrequently and PP effectively minimizes dermal contact. Hazard control for acetone. The effective control of acetone hazard in the workplace requires adherence to the hierarchy of controls outlined in the Chemical Health Risk Assessment Framework under the Occupational Safety and Health USH Regulation 2000 regulations. This hierarchical approach emphasizes the prioritization of control based on effectiveness, starting from elimination to the use of personal protective equipment. Number 1. Elimination and substitution. The most effective control method is the elimination of substituent of acetone. For instance, replacing acetone with a less volatile and less hazardous solvent during cleaning or manufacturing processes can significantly reduce risk. However, this method may not always be feasible for existing processes due to cost or technical limitations. It is therefore most practical during the design phase of new workflows or products. Number 2, engineering control. If elimination is not feasible, engineering control are the next best option. This control focuses on isolating workers from the hazard by implementing physical modifications to the workplace. For acetone, the installation of local exhaust ventilation system is an effective measure to limit inhalation exposure by capturing and removing acetone vapors at the source. Additionally, general dilution ventilation can reduce the concentration of airborne acetone in enclosed spaces. Number 3, administrative control. Administrative control are strategies aimed at changing work practices to reduce exposure. Examples include: first, training program. Workers should be educated on the proper handling of acetone, the symptom of overexposure, and the use of safety equipment. Number 2, exposure monitoring. Regular sampling and monitoring can ensure compliance with exposure limits, such as the permissible exposure limit specified in the use regulation. Number 3, work schedule. Adjustment limiting the duration of tasks involving acetone can reduce overall exposure. The last but not least, personal protective equipment. PPE acts as the final line of defense when other controls cannot fully eliminate risk. For acetone, appropriate PPE includes gloves. Use chemical resistant gloves such as those made of nitrile to protect against skin irritation and defatting. Respirator. When airborne concentration are high, respirator equipped with organic vapor cartridges should be worn to prevent inhalation of acetone vapors. Last but not least, eye protection. Safety goggles can prevent eye irritation caused by acetone splashes.
For the introduction to carbon monoxide, some of the properties of carbon monoxide are odorless, tasteless, and colorless gases. It is highly toxic to human and animals. Some of the sources of carbon dioxide is produced by incomplete combustion. Materials such as coal, natural gases, oil, propane, kerosene, and wood. Common industrial sources would be furnace, forges, and coke kilns, and internal combustion engines, particularly in vehicles, and in some domestic sources are improper operation or maintenance, heating and cooking equipments. The potential outcome of exposure to carbon monoxide can lead to organ failure and death if not treated promptly, and also critical need for quick diagnosis and intervention in the workplace. How carbon monoxide affects the blood. CO bind with the hemoglobin, formulating carboxyhemoglobin. CO has 230 to 270 times greater affinity for hemoglobin than oxygen, and some of the factors that influence the carboxyhemoglobin formation is the CO concentration, exposure duration, pulmonary ventilation, and individual health status. In recent studies, smokers have 10 to 15 higher carboxyhemoglobin saturation due to CO in cigarette smoke. For controlling carbon monoxide exposure can be engineering control, whereby install system to ensure continuous flow of fresh air, reducing the CO concentration, and also proper design, installation, and maintenance are crucial. For mechanical ventilation, for example, mechanical ventilation system and local exhaust system. For the administrative control, it is important to have a workplace monitoring, regularly measure CO levels across various areas, establishing a monitoring program to assess control measure and identify CO sources. And some of the safe work practices should be enforced, practices that minimize CO generation. For example, provide training to workers on the proper use of equipment and machinery. For personal protective equipment, respirator is important. It provides appropriate respiratory protection based on air monitoring result. Training and education, there should be a comprehensive training to educate workers on CO dangers. its health effect and how it recognize symptoms and how to recognize symptoms of poisoning. Maintenance and inspection is needed to be done for the controlling of CO exposure. Preventive maintenance should be implement a schedule for equipment that produces or release CO. Emergency planning is for emergency response plans, and it is done to develop and regularly review evacuation procedures for CO releases. Integrating safety measures is by combining engineering control, administrative control, PPE training, emergency planning, and maintenance create a safer workplace. And there should be a regular reviews and updates to ensure proactive CO safety management.
Asbestos is a group of naturally occurring fibrous mineral which include types like chrysotile, amosite, and crocidolite. Historically, asbestos was widely used in industries due to its heat-resistant strength and insulating properties. Asbestos has three different colors, which is white, brown, and blue, which also has different chemical formula. Although asbestos was once valued for its properties, we now know that inhaling asbestos fiber poses serious health risks. These fibers can become lodged in lung tissue and lead to severe respiratory disease, including asbestosis, lung cancer, and mesothelioma. These diseases often have a delayed onset, making early detection difficult. Given the risk, it's essential to control asbestos exposure in workplace where asbestos-containing material or ACM are present. So these are the methods of controlling asbestos exposure. We can control asbestos exposure through several strategies following the hierarchy of control: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. The most effective way to control asbestos exposure is through elimination or substitution. This means removing asbestos-containing material from the workplace and replacing them with a safer alternative. Materials like cellulose, fiberglass, and polyurethane foam can be used instead in insulation or construction project. By eliminating asbestos, we remove the risk entirely, reducing the need for other control measures like PPE. Next is engineering controls. Engineering controls focus on isolating and containing the hazard. One example is using barriers or constructing negative pressure enclosures around asbestos work area. These enclosures prevent asbestos fiber from spreading around the spaces. Additionally, using specialized ventilation system with high efficiency particulate air or HEPA filters help capture airborne asbestos fiber. HEPA filter can trap particles as small as 0.3 microns, which is effective in high-risk area. This engineering solution prevents asbestos fiber from escaping into the thin air and minimize exposure at its source. Next is administrative control, which involves changing work procedure to reduce exposure. Workers need thorough training on how to safely handle asbestos-containing material and how to recognize potential hazard. One safe work practice is wetting asbestos material before handling them, as this helps suppress dust and limit the release of fibers into the air. Additionally, work schedule can be designed to reduce the number of workers exposed at one time, and access to high-risk areas should be restricted to trained personnel only. Finally, personal protective equipment or PPE act as the last line of defense. Workers handling asbestos must wear full-face respirators with HEPA filter to prevent inhaling dangerous fibers. They should also wear disposable protective clothing, including coveralls, glove, and shoe covers. This prevents asbestos from contaminating their personal clothing and spreading to other areas. After completing the task, workers must follow strict decontamination procedures such as showering and safely disposing the PPE to avoid secondary exposure. In conclusion, asbestos poses serious health risks, but by following the hierarchy of controls, starting by elimination and substitution, supported by engineering and administrative control, and reinforced by PPE, we can effectively manage asbestos exposure in the workplace. The goal is to prioritize methods that prevent exposure at the source, ensuring the safety of workers and reducing long-term health risks.
Hi, welcome. It's me again, Isni. So I'm going to present now about chemical hazard and risk management procedure in Malaysia. So today we will explore the essential framework and action necessary to ensure safety in workplace handling hazardous chemical. So managing chemical hazard is crucial for ensuring workplace safety, safeguarding public health, and promoting environmental sustainability. Our approach is not just about compliance, it's about protecting life and the world around us. So in Malaysia, our efforts are governed by robust legislation, including Occupational Safety and Health 2022, Factory and Machinery Act 1967, the Environmental Quality Schedule-wise Regulation of 1989. So these law provide the foundation for all our chemical safety protocol. So specific regulation, moreover, such as Usage 2000 and SIMA 1996, align our local practice with globally harmonized system GHS, which standardizes the classification and labeling of chemical globally. Okay, so let's discuss next on the three components of our chemical management strategy. Okay, the first one is we implement systematic control measure, educate our worker, and conduct true chemical risk assessment to manage risk proactively. Okay. Secondly, continuous monitoring of chemical exposure, ensuring ongoing safety and compliance. And thirdly, waste management, where safe disposal of hazardous waste is managed under the strict guideline of the Environmental Quality Act 1974. So there is, other than these two, there are other components inside this chemical hazard and risk management procedure in Malaysia. So the third component is labeling of chemical. So the proper labeling of chemical is vital. It ensures the effective communication of chemical risk, promoting safe handling and usage. Okay, this is regulated under the usage regulation, which are aligned with GHS as I mentioned earlier. Okay, and next one, mandatory labeling requirement. Our labeling is comprehensive, including hazard pictogram, signal words, hazard statement, and precautionary statement, along with product and supplier identification. So these elements adhere strictly to GHS standards to ensure clarity and effective risk communication. Okay, so the next one, durability and accessibility. Label durability is also critical. Our labels are designed to withstand harsh environmental conditions without fading or peeling and are required to be bilingual. It must be in BM and English, ensuring accessibility for all workers. And number 6 is inspection and maintenance. So regular inspection are conducted to maintain the clarity and accuracy of this label. We are going to discuss about chemical handling training in Malaysia. There are 5 points that I would like to highlight that I have already divided it into 2 separate slides, so bear with me. Okay, so the first one is on training program requirement. Okay, so there are 4 of it that I'm going to talk about today. The first one is hazard awareness. Okay, starting with hazard awareness, employees are educated about chemical hazard, the importance of safety data sheet, and understanding permissible exposure limit. As for the personal protective equipment (PPE), training also emphasized the correct selection, use, and maintenance of PPE. This is crucial for ensuring personal safety and compliance with Malaysian standards. And then third, training emergency procedure. We also prepare our workers for emergency, including chemical spillage, fire. Okay, they are trained in first aid procedure and evacuation control. And then lastly, the safe work practice. Moreover, this training is focusing on safe work practice such as proper chemical handling, storage, and disposal, and avoiding unsafe practices like mixing incompatible chemical. Okay, so the second one, interactive and practical approach. Okay, our approach to training is both interactive and practical. Okay, we use hands-on demonstration, role-playing, simulation to ensure that the learning is effective and engaging. And then thirdly, frequency of the training itself. Training is not one-time event. Okay, it includes initial session for new workers, annual updates, and situational training whenever new chemical or processes are included. So in slide 3, I'm going to continue regarding the chemical handling training in Malaysia. Okay, the documentation and certification. So every training session is documented truly. Workers who demonstrate competency receive certificates, okay, which are important for both legal compliance and personal accountability. And as for the last point, number 5, legal and best practice compliance. Adherence to training protocol is not just about following the law. It also involve integrating industry best practice to enhance safety. Okay, regular inspection by DOSH ensures that these standards are best met. Next, I'm going to talk about risk assessment in chemical management. Okay, so firstly, identifying chemical hazard. Okay, risk assessment start with a thorough review of safety data sheet to ensure we understand the chemical properties and hazard. It's also important to consider workplace specific factors such as how chemicals are stored or disposed of. And then second point, evaluating risk. We evaluate the likelihood and severity of exposure to these chemicals using tools like monitoring equipment and qualitative judgment. Okay, and number 3, implementing control measure. Okay, the hierarchy of control measure guides us in minimizing risk. This ranges from elimination and substitution to engineering and administrative control, along with lastly the usage of PPE. Okay, so for number 4, documentation and regular update. Keeping detailed record of all risk assessment and regularly updating them is crucial, especially after incident or when changes occur in a workplace. Okay, and 5th is reporting and accountability. So finally, it is essential to communicate all findings and control measures to workers to ensure compliance through regular audits by DOSH inspection. Okay, in conclusion, what is the conclusion? So in conclusion, adhering to this guideline reduce chemical related risks, improve workplace safety, and ensure compliance with Malaysian law. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. Today we are focusing on monitoring chemical exposure in the workplace to ensure safety standards in Malaysia are maintained and adhered to. Let's begin with the objective of today's discussion, ensuring that worker exposure to hazardous substances remain with safe limits. We are guided by the use regulation under the Occupational Safety and Health Act 1994. Types of monitoring. First, let's discuss the 3 main types of monitoring. Personal exposure monitoring. This involves measuring individual exposure using personal sampling devices when during work, especially critical for high-risk tasks close to hazardous chemical. Environmental monitoring. This assesses hazardous substance concentrations in the workplace atmosphere and evaluates the effectiveness of engineering controls like ventilation system. Biological monitoring. This method measures chemicals or their metabolites in biological samples such as blood or urine, useful for tracking substances with cumulative effects. Workplace exposure limits. Understanding workplace exposure limit is crucial. This include time-weighted average. This is the average exposure over an 8-hour shift. Short-term exposure limit. This is the maximum allowable exposure for 15-minute period. Ceiling limit. This is the maximum concentration that should never be exceeded at any time. If these limits are exceeded, corrective measures must be implemented promptly, which might include improved ventilation, revised work procedures, or additional personal protective equipment. Documentation and communication. It's essential to maintain records of monitoring data, methods, and results. Equally important is communicating these results and any corrective actions to workers, informing them of exposure levels and associated health risks. Frequency of monitoring. Monitoring should be conducted at regular intervals to ensure ongoing compliance, especially after any changes in chemical use, processes, or conditions, and following incidents that may affect exposure levels. Legal and best practice compliance. Non-compliance can lead to penalties under OSHA 1994. Moreover, monitoring aligns with the Environmental Quality Schedule Waste Regulation 1989, helping to prevent both environmental and worker exposure risk. Moving on to Safety Data Sheet or SDS. The purpose of this document is to provide essential information on hazardous chemicals for safe handling, use, storage, and disposal. They are mandated under the Use Regulation 2000 and align with the Globally Harmonized System or GHS. Mandatory SDS content. Identification of the chemical includes product name, users, supplier information, and emergency context. Hazard identification provides details on physical, health, and environmental hazards, including GHS and client classification, pictograms, and signal words. Composition and ingredients offers a breakdown of chemical composition and hazardous ingredient. First aid measures provides step-by-step guidance for treating exposure. Handling and storage instruction outlines best practices for safe handling and specific storage requirements. Disposal guidelines detail procedure for safe disposal and environmental protection. Accessibility of SDS. SDS must be accessible in both printed and digital formats and stored in easily accessible areas like storage room or safety offices. SDS updates and maintenance. Regular reviews and updates of SDS are crucial, particularly with new chemical information or changes in the regulation. Retaining SDS even after chemicals are no longer in use is also a best practice. Employer responsibilities. Employer must ensure that workers understand how to read and use SDS and include SDS reviews in the chemical risk assessment. Legal implication. Non-adherence can result in penalties under OSHA 1994 and Use Regulation. DOSH regularly checks for SDS compliance. Best practices for SDS implementation. Employ standardized format for clarity, provide multilingual support as needed, and embed SDS knowledge into training programs. Thank you.